So if you have questions, please try to jot them down. We'll have time for questions afterwards if we talk really fast. And we'll try to get to you at that point in time. All right, so Dr. Hogan.
Hi, everybody. I'm new to Mississippi, but I love it here. So y'all, thank you for welcoming me with open arms. Been here for about 1.5 years. I'm really blessed and honored to be a faculty member at the University of Southern Mississippi School of Social Work, the Golden Eagles, and yeah, that's right. But also, I do recognize we're here in SEC country. So, and I also recognize that it's going to take all of us in a joint effort to combat human trafficking. And I want to echo what Michael Watson said today and Joe Paul, that this is a community effort. Yes, Dr. Hurst and I are running data, trying to understand, applying for grants to serve our communities, but it takes each and every one of us in this room as a united front to combat, to look for those missing children, to bring hope to those that need the hope, and to build out a continuum of care within our state over these next 5 years is the driving fact of what we're here doing today. So we are now going to begin with our Human Trafficking 101, and we're going to go back and forth today. So Tamara. Yeah, so we'll start off. Human trafficking. This issue was just in 2000, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act was just enacted in the United States. And what we know about human trafficking is often seen on the news, and this is something that we are making a concerted effort to show imagery, and we'll show you that today, of how we look at and understand human trafficking. A lot of people, including myself, when I first was learning about human trafficking, thought it was a white paddy wagon vehicle with a man with a purple pink costume from Party City, and he looks like Snoop Dogg. This was me 10 years ago. Y'all can laugh. It's okay. That was me 10 years ago. I was teaching high school in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm a LeBron James fan as well. I was teaching, and one of my students was making limited eye contact with me, was withdrawing in the classroom. But Dad worked at the high school with me, and I thought, you know what? She's probably just depressed. She's a junior in high school. I sent her to guidance. That summer came and went. When I came back, the dad said to me, my daughter will not be back this year. I said, what's going on? Well, we had to send her to a trauma healing ranch in Texas and get her away from the trafficker. I said, what? How did I not know what was going on within my classroom? And I know that there's school teachers here today. I really applaud you working with these kids on the daily. Recognizing that within the classroom, I wish I knew this knowledge. And the more I looked into this knowledge, this was back in 2012, 2013, the realization of we don't know these statistics. What we do know is sex trafficking doesn't look like a white paddy wagon, doesn't look like a guy. Often guys are labeled as traffickers, but we now understand that traffickers can be anyone. And it's that person that preys on the vulnerability of a victim, of somebody that's vulnerable. We're also going to talk about labor trafficking, and this can occur to anybody, adults, children, male, female, and non-binary individuals. My dissertation focused on, and there's a major gap in the literature, of a lot of the literature in the United States focuses on young, and then the victims that are served are often females, right? I see a lot of people shaking their heads. I wanted to fill that gap in knowledge as a researcher, and my dissertation focused on LGBTQ youth that have been trafficked, to show that and fill that gap in knowledge and how to best serve them is something that's near and dear to my heart. So human trafficking, this was first defined in 2000, is a crime involving the exploitation of someone to perform labor or commercial sex acts through force, fraud, or coercion. Sex trafficking is a commercial sex act induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained 18 years of age. Commercial sex act, oftentimes we see in the movies. Who's seen the movie Taken? Taken, okay. There's an exchange of something of value. That something of value is often money, right? Exchanging sex for something of value is often money, but other items such as the Air Jordans. I'm a sneakerhead myself. $400 new pair of Jordans would be nice, right? Playing into the vulnerability of what that victim wants or needs. The unfortunate reality, a lot of with our homeless individuals is protection or a place to stay. That is an exchange of sex for something of value, drugs, and the list goes on. But as long as there's an exchange of sex for something of value, that is commercial sex trafficking. That individual, when we look at the letter of the law, if they're under 18 years of age and exchanging sex for something of value, force, fraud, or coercion, those three aspects do not have to be proven in a court of law. Labor trafficking involves where there's recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining a person for labor or services through the use of these three elements, again, force, fraud, or coercion, for the purpose of subjectation to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. Out of these two, which do we hear the most about? Sex trafficking or labor trafficking? Show of hands. Sex trafficking. Labor trafficking. Okay. Here's the interesting thing. As a researcher in our center, we know that sex trafficking is often in the media, but labor trafficking is often the most prevalent and something that we need to investigate further as researchers and the stakeholders across the state to look more into this. But it's hard to locate and hard to find. Why is that? We're gonna go into that today. Then minor sex trafficking, just to bring this home, again, if somebody's under 18, it's always sex trafficking, and there does not have to be a third party involved. So when I was working with CPS in the state of Mississippi, we did a statewide training with them. And oftentimes we get into these conversations of a runaway kid exchanging sex for something of value, which would be a hotel room. Would that qualify under sex trafficking? Yes, good job, we're getting it. Why? Because they're under 18, right? If they're exchanging sex for a McDonald's meal, they're exchanging sex for a hotel room. I see a lot of people shaking their heads. That is, unfortunately, sex trafficking. When we look at force, fraud, or coercion, oftentimes, again, we see in the media and in Hollywood movies about this aspect of force. And I think it's because it's sensationalized. And that's something else Dr. Hurst and I are very strong about, is the portrayal of trafficking in the media. We need to be more realistic of how it plays out, but what's actually happening. Yes, elements of kidnapping and confinement and restraint are used, absolutely. But is that the number one? No, there's actually fraud and coercion as well. I used to analyze all the juvenile and adult sex trafficking cases in Las Vegas with our undercover unit. And what I found is these traffickers, and this is a report out if you want to look it up, so sex trafficking in Las Vegas. Pull the report and you'll see that, yes, there's elements of kidnapping, confinement, and physical restraint, but this is often used on victims if they aren't following the rules. If they aren't doing what that trafficker wants, which is what? Making that person quota, making that person the money, okay? Unfortunate reality too is sexual assault. So breaking that individual into the life, and also drugging. Again, see this often in the cases, and we'll learn more today through our panelists potentially about the aspect of drugging. But individuals are either come into the situation needing drugs or addicted to drugs, but we've also read stories, again, in these Las Vegas cases I refer to, is that we find that the traffickers get them addicted to the drugs. Literally, traffickers, when I'm reading cases, will blow the drugs into the faces of the victims to get them addicted. Why is this? Why is it that a trafficker would want this person to be addicted to a drug? Raise your hand. I know a lot of people are, that's good, we're all engaged. Raise your hand. What do you think? Yeah. To get control. Why? Because now that victim not just has to go to that trafficker for food, you did a great job. that trafficker also is saying, I'm now the person that you get drugs from, and you're now addicted and you have to come to me. It's a very unfortunate reality, and there are laws now that are gaining speed across different states in the United States where drugs are being used as a vehicle and can be now prosecuted as part of a trafficking case. Fraudulent activity, tricking the victim to believing that the trafficker loves them. So if you love me, you will do this for me. And then telling the victim they're going to be a model, we see this often as well. Come to New Orleans and make $5,000 on the weekend being an entertainer. Offering to provide basic needs without explaining the true intention. So we see this within the research that I've done in our LGBTQ community. Unfortunately, a lot of these kids are homeless or looking for someone to be a family member to take care of them. And they say, please just stay at my house, right? And they go and stay. And then the unfortunate reality of it turns into more. So it turns into not explaining the true intention of when they stay at this house, they're racking up a debt and then coercing them and forcing them into a fraudulent situation. Coercion, blackmail, so using photos, unfortunate circumstances. If you don't do this for me, this may happen. We will see this play out tonight in our sextortion documentary that we're showing. Debt bondage. I read this in cases where individuals would be flown into Las Vegas, told that they would have these lucrative jobs in Las Vegas working at casinos, right? And they were staying at hotels, racking up hotel, and now they have to pay for it, okay? So now they have this $500 room charge for the week, and how are they going to pay for that? Well, that's where the trafficker flips the script and says, you need to do this now, coercion. And then the unfortunate reality of threats against victims or a victim's family member. I've worked with victims, both children and adults, and I see this often play out, whether it's I did this to protect my little baby sister so she didn't have to do it, or I did this so my dog was not shot, in situations like that, just terrible circumstances. And trafficking versus smuggling, we often see this in the media as well, that we see a truck full of individuals and it's called human trafficking. Is that human trafficking? No, that is called smuggling, okay? So trafficking is this exploitative nature. It is exploitation based. It involves forcing labor or commercial sexual exploitation. The consent is not involved. However, smuggling is transportation based, right? Across state lines often, and it violates immigration laws. And there's an element of consent, right? I want to move to this new country. I want to go to California. There's an element of consent. Smuggling sometimes can lead to trafficking situations where we see, I'm not the expert in this, I'm looking at Guy and Heather right now, our fabulous MBI data analysts, and realizing that smuggling can occur when someone's brought from, say, Mexico across the state lines, but then they can maybe get into debt bondage situations where they now have to pay somebody, and then it can flip the script of turning into trafficking situations. Now, Dr. Hurst.
So I heard this word up here, this phrase poverty porn, while I was listening to NPR in the car. And not paying much attention to NPR, but all of a sudden poverty porn came up. And it's like, poverty porn, what is that? And so I had to look further into it. I mean, it's kind of, touches your ear, especially in our field. And so what it is the marketing of something to get a big response. So if you've all seen the ads on television that are related to maybe send money to feed children, and they will show you the most poverty-stricken children they can find. They will show you in the worst conditions because they want to elicit a response, right? They want your money. So what poverty porn does is encourage us for that one moment to engage, but it doesn't require, to do action later. So maybe you send the money, but then do you really want to fix whatever problem is happening in that country? They do it with animals too. The animal ones are the worst. They show the little cages and the little animals. Y'all seen that, right? And they want you to send some money and you want to engage and maybe you'll do something later. But most often we don't. So I applied this word to what we do in human trafficking and what's up on our billboards and what is found in our magazine articles. And when we do newspaper reports or television reports, and we're encouraging the marketing or the bringing the information to you of human trafficking to be actually realistic. And so what we've got is false narratives out there, and that brings us false information. And it builds on itself. For example, the word trafficking itself is pretty misleading, right? It sounds like you gotta move somewhere. It sounds like you have to cross a state line or a county line, or you have to go somewhere. You can be trafficked or exploited in the same place the whole time. It's misleading. So everything about this narrative that we build can mislead us into thinking it's something that it's not. So we have a lot of images that are out there. The people involved in the anti-human trafficking effort, we do want to raise awareness, and they do spark your interest. When you see some of these images, like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. So this one was a billboard, and you may have seen it. Has anybody seen this image before? A couple of people. So it was a big billboard outside of Hattiesburg, and you'll see it in the press or on television. And what do you see when you look at this? Handcuffs and shackles. What else do you see? Do the words help me? So we know a lot of our persons that are affected by this exploitation are not bound by these shackles. They're bound by emotional manipulation. We know that the people that are affected by this are not asking for our help because they're traumatized, they don't trust us, and they don't think we can help. So if you're thinking that you're going to run across somebody that is physically bound and asking for help, that's not what we're going to see. This one was on a cover of American Nurse Today, and I'm sure they put it on the cover because they want you to pick it up and read the magazine. But what do you see on the cover? Oh. Oh, what? Okay, yes, you see the title. We see a female. It's obvious there's a physical restraint. Number one, that's a white female. And we know from statistics, from research, that our persons of color are more likely to be victims of human trafficking than white females. We have a male holding this person back. We have a male with dirty fingers and just trying to restrain her. Well, we know that our exploiters can be either females or males. And again, with the physical restraint. She looks scared, or a little concerned. A lot of our victims of human trafficking never see it coming. So there was one survivor, an adult survivor, who had been trafficked when she was young. And she had had an argument with her mother. My daughter's here in the audience, so I'm going to give this story. Anybody ever had an argument with their mother? That hand high. Okay, so she had an argument with her mother, and she stomped out of the house. And she went down to the local arcade, and she was sitting there just fuming about this argument with her mother. And she sees a man approach her. Well, she said, in her words, he looked fine. He was like coming toward her, and she's like, I like what I see. And he sits down next to her, and he says, you look like you're upset. And she just starts talking about her mother. I had to fight with my mother. And he said, I can't believe she said that to you. And then he starts talking about, you're so pretty. I can't believe you're sitting out here by yourself. And they start to engage. That one moment of vulnerability in her life, that one moment was all it took. She may not have engaged with this guy at any other point, but she happened to be in a place by herself and she was mad and he took advantage of it. To the exploiter, he can move on. If she didn't pick up on it, he'll just go find somebody else. But that one moment of vulnerability is what got her hooked. And he asked her over to his place. And that's where she was further groomed, and she was 12 years old. Now, if y'all think back to 12 years old and how much you think you knew everything, and you would never fall for something like that, this is what's happening out there. So it's not, it's not the van. It could be. Those things do happen. But most often, it's that one moment of vulnerability that's so hard to protect against. We see a lot of these, especially in January. This month is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And we see the pictures with the barcodes. Now, we know that our exploiters do brand or tattoo their victims often. It degrades them, it dehumanizes them, it makes them feel like property. So that is a tactic that some of our exploiters use. But when you put it up there with the barcode like slave, it sends a certain message. First of all, slave is an appropriated term. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And the barcode is more sensationalized. I'm not saying there aren't any exploiters out there that might use the barcode, they might. But that's not what we see typically. And my favorite one to talk about. I saw all y'all raise your hands when you saw Taken. And it's a good action film. Keeps you engaged, right? And people, when they talk about human trafficking, they refer back to that movie. I know what that is. But think about what that is. That was a rich white girl who went overseas, who was abducted by Middle Eastern men, whose CIA daddy came and rescued her. Does that happen? Is that our scenario? No. Not saying it can't happen, but that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for people who have that moment of vulnerability, who need something. The girl in the arcade, she needed somebody. She just needed somebody to validate her for a second. That's all it takes. So those movies are big and splashy, but no, this is not what we're trying to do. When we educate and build awareness, we're trying to tell you that it's in our neighborhoods. It's not just truck stops. It's not along the interstate corridors only. It's not urban. It's not just in, Jackson or Meridian or Hattiesburg. It's everywhere. And it's not new. This has been going on forever. We're just now starting to pay attention to it. These are people who have been doing things for a long time, and they know what they're doing. So we've got some imagery that better portrays what we might see out here. Now, these are more labor trafficking related. Hardly ever see imagery like this out there for labor trafficking. But if you look at it, we have domestic workers. We have persons that may be working in service industries or the construction industry. This is where we see a lot of labor trafficking happen. Particularly when you have people that need to support their families that don't have any other way to bring money or home or to bring food to the table, and they fall prey to somebody that says, hey, we've got great wages, you can come work here. We'll help you with documentation, you can come work here. We're going to talk a little bit later about the bait and switch and the manipulation involved with that. These photos were provided by our funders, our federal funders. Dr. Hogan and I were funded to work a 5-year demonstration program working in the lower 9 counties of the state, building out human trafficking protocols and a continuum of care. So we asked them, give us appropriate images that we can share, that everybody can use. So you all can use these images. You can take photos of them and use them. If we consider these more appropriately representative of what's happening in the labor trafficking arena. If you're going to talk about agriculture or construction, or maybe just someone that's in school, like Dr. Hogan's story about the person in her class. So all of these are more appropriate representations of what can actually happen out there. I have to talk about the importance of language as well. We brought up the word earlier, prostitution and prostitute. And a lot of people say, so what's the difference? You're trading sex for something. You're prostituting. You are a prostitute. That is called prostitution. So we need to pull back the layers a little bit and think about what that is. Prostitution is actually a criminal justice term. It's part of our laws. So if you think about what's underneath prostitution, was there a choice behind it? What happened to bring this person to that point? How is that person engaged, and is there force, fraud, and coercion involved? Now, there is no such thing as a child prostitute. Every once in a while, we talk to people and they'll say, that girl was out there, she put herself online, she's collecting money, that's a child prostitute. We need to eradicate that from our language. No such thing. That is an exploited child, an exploited minor. We don't talk about child prostitutes because there is no such thing. Now, we do every once in a while talk about youth who have put themselves out there online, and we say things like, he or she made a choice. So if we're talking about under 18, and they put something online, and somebody exchanges, and they end up with a commercial sex act, that is human trafficking. No choice involved in that. Take the choice out of it. If we're talking about adults, then we need to think about what brought that person to that point and what services do they need. Because honestly, most people are not going to do that exchange. They're going to want for nothing. I mean, they need to feed their families. They need to put that roof over their heads. The survivors I talked to, that's why they were out there. Now, is that a choice? We don't have legal economic opportunities that can pay their way, or they don't have transferable skills. So how do we provide those services for people that may be exchanging sex and putting themselves in harm's way when that may not have been their choice? There were a lot of push factors that put them out there. So I'm just asking you to change the paradigm and just think about it a little bit. Just think about it a little bit differently. We did this with domestic violence way back when. We did this with child abuse way back then. Child abuse, we used to think a few decades ago that it happened to 1 in a million children. Like it didn't even happen. If anybody's my age, you might remember. But think about how we've changed it now. We recognize it now. This is what we're trying to do with exploitation. I want to take modern day slavery out of the lexicon as well. Modern day slavery does have some characteristics with human trafficking, but it describes a very specific time, experiences that happen to persons of color during that time, and we can't appropriate modern day slavery to describe human trafficking. We see it in the print all the time. It's just trying to spark that interest. Human trafficking is exploitation, it's manipulation of persons that need our help. Look, I'm not coming across the speech. Oh. Yeah, so who are the traffickers? So when I used to think about who is the trafficker, again, I always refer back to that Snoop Dogg book. Analyzing case after case in Las Vegas and Phoenix, through my experience, I've come to realize, and the data shows throughout in the United States, that traffickers are exploiters, and they can be any gender of any age. Okay, some are strangers, boyfriends, girlfriends, peers, friends, or family members. The main aspect of a trafficker, the one thing that they have all in the same understanding, is that they are exploiting another individual for their gain. Okay, they are the exploiter, and dispelling the myth that that person needs to look like Snoop Dogg. What's his name? Shooky Shook?
No, Huggy Bear. Huggy Bear.
Huggy Bear from the movie. Okay, realizing that all different demographics, all different ages, but they are playing on the vulnerabilities of an individual's.